There's an interesting song in our book. It's on page 59, number 59. Break thou the bread of life. We sing that sometime before the Lord's Supper, don't we? This song has nothing whatever to do with the Lord's Supper. Break thou the bread of life, dear Lord, to me, as thou didst break the loaves beside the sea. Beyond the sacred page, I seek thee, Lord. My spirit plants for thee, O living word. The reason that I call attention to this is because today I want to talk to you about the bread of life, the feeding of the 5,000. That song that I just read to you is really about Jesus as being the bread of life for us. It isn't about the Lord's Supper. It's about His Word. Break the bread of life to me the way you broke the bread by Galilee is really what He says. The feeding of the 5,000 is one of the very few miracles that are mentioned by all of the writers of the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all do that. However, John gives a discourse after this that tells us something about the whole idea of recording this great miracle. John gives us what we call the discourse on the bread of life. Now, that's an entirely different topic. We're not going to talk about that this morning, but it is an interesting thing the way Jesus links the idea of physical bread to the idea of taking His Word into our lives. We just read about this miracle, the feeding of the 5,000. We read about how Jesus spoke to one of His disciples, Philip, and said, "Philip, where can we get bread?" And Philip said, "There's too many people." A large crowd followed Jesus, and He went up onto a mountain, and He wanted to kind of be alone for a while with His disciples. But the crowd was so enthusiastic about Him, they went up and found Him. And Jesus had compassion on them, and it was at this time that He fed the 5,000. Well, let's take a look at this miracle itself. It certainly is one of the most spectacular miracles in all of the things that Jesus did. I think pretty much all of them we could say are pretty spectacular. But this one, feeding 5,000 people, there have been a lot of objections to this miracle. It's not really a miracle at all, some people say. Well, why? Well, because it's a total impossibility. Yes, that's true. That could be said of any of the miracles, couldn't it? It's an absolute impossibility. Jesus gave sight to the blind, hearing to the deaf. He gave the ability to walk to the lame man. All kinds of miracles like this, and none of them stand to reason. Every single one of them is impossible, except for the fact that we're looking at supernatural, not just natural. Supernatural goes on beyond what natural has. You see, when I take something and drop it, it always goes down. Have you ever dropped anything and have it go up? No, it always goes down. That's one of the laws of nature. Now, if we dropped something and it went up, that would be supernature. That's beyond the laws of nature. The miracles are beyond the laws of nature, as we talked about in the sermon 2 weeks ago. Well, in thinking together about this idea that this thing is impossible, some people say, well, you know, the writers of the gospel just wrote beautiful stories about how wonderful Jesus was. How could they express it better than to say this man was supernatural? They didn't really happen. They're just stories that grew up. No, that's not true. Jesus Himself affirmed that these are miracles. He spoke of them as signs. When there was a man who was lame and now can walk, and a lot of people saw it. It was not done in a closet somewhere. It wasn't done off in the corner. Instead, people saw it, and people admired it, and people were amazed by the things that he did. This whole idea that it's impossible and they're just beautiful stories like this arose from something that scholars make a division about. Scholars who do not accept the miraculous view of the Bible, they have something they call the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith. The Jesus of history is the man who walked the hills of Galilee. He was just like any other man. There was nothing miraculous about him. He was just like every other person, and he was a historical person just like you and I are historical people. Real man. Now, because he did so many, taught so many wonderful things, and he was such a great man, mythology grew up about him. He was a man who worked miracles. He was a man who walked on water. He was a man who gave sight to the blind. No, these didn't just happen. This never did really take place. But people began believing that, he can do anything. So they said, this anointed one is what our faith is in. Yeah, Jesus lived as a human being, the Jesus of history, but this Christ of faith is this mystical person who worked miracles. That person never really existed. It's all a matter of our minds, they say, No, that's not a matter of our minds, folks. That man really existed. That man really worked miracles, just like we talked about last week and the week before. Well, superstition. People say sometime that all of this is superstition. No, it's not superstition. Well, this was a pre-scientific time of history. People didn't think in terms of science and nature and things like that, supernature. I wrote something down here. No, they did not live in a scientific world, but neither were they stupid people. They were logical people just like we are. They had brains to think with just like we do. And so the idea is that we need to stop and think about Christ as a supernatural person. Gentlemen, would you close the doors, please? Thank you. There are a lot of things that we accept that we don't understand. I have a TV. I turn it on. I have no idea how it works. Now somebody says, yes, but some other people who invented this, they know how it works. Hey, let me tell you something. The one who invented the universe, we call him God. He knows the answers to miracles. I don't know it, but he does. I've got a computer. I sit out almost all day and work on it. I don't understand how in the world it works, but I accept it. We do this all the time. My wife drove a car. She didn't know how it worked. I did, because I happen to have a degree in engineering. And so I knew how it worked. She didn't have a clue about how it worked, but she drove it. We accept a lot of things that we don't understand. And just because I don't understand miracles doesn't mean that the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 never happened. It simply means that understanding it is beyond the capability that natural people have. Some people opposed Jesus' miracles, not because they denied them, but because they didn't like them. They didn't like Jesus. John 11, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Well, they had some opposers, they had some opposition, and here Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, and Lazarus is raised from the dead, and Lazarus now is among them. Let me read you something. Some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting with the Sanhedrin, and they said, "What are we accomplishing? Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone's going to believe in him. And then the Romans are going to come and take away our place. They didn't want to believe in Jesus. Yeah, there are people who don't want to believe in him. Why? Well, they don't want to believe in him because he's demanding. He demands my loyalty. He demands my life. It isn't just a matter of I'll be good at this time, and this time, and then I can do what I want the rest of the time. No, he wants the whole thing. He didn't say, give me 2/3 of your life. He didn't say, give me 3/4 of your life. He says, give me your life. He wants you 24 hours every day, 7 days every week, for as long as you live. And some people just don't want that. And then some people feel like, well, this is my life. I will live it the way I want to. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. When the apostles went out and they healed a lame man, fellow had been lame from his birth, and he was at the door of the gate of the temple, and he was there and he was begging. Well, Peter and John came in and they raised this man up, and this man went jumping and leaping and praising God. And people saw it. And they said, isn't this the man? That's the guy. That's the guy. Listen to this. They arrested Peter and John. And then when they had a private meeting, they said, the people who were opposing him, what are we going to do with these men? They asked. Everybody living in Jerusalem knows that they have done outstanding miracles. And we can't deny it. But to stop this thing from spreading any further among the people, we must warn these men not to speak any longer in this name. Well, you see, some people just don't want Christ. Some people don't want the miracles. Now, let's take a look at the people who are involved in this miracle. This miracle of feeding the 5,000. It's kind of interesting the way John gives some information that the others don't give. Kind of interesting that John said, Jesus turned to Philip and he said, Philip, I got to ask you a question. Now, Philip lived right close by. Philip was from Bethsaida, which was a little town just right close to where they were at this time. He said, Philip, where are we going to get enough bread to feed all these people? And Philip said, I don't have any idea. You know, a denarii was a day's wage. And he says, 8 months worth of money would not even begin to feed these people. 8 months worth. Well, you know, he saw the obstacles. Somebody says, we need this. Jesus said, Philip, we need bread. All Philip could see is, look at all those people out there. There's no place in the world we can get that much bread to feed these people. He saw obstacles. He saw the impossibility of the situation. We need people like that. People like that make us stop and think. People like that make us stop and say, yes, there is a problem, there is a difficulty, there is an obstacle. How do we solve it? So people who see the problems are not people we ought to ignore. They're people we ought to embrace and bring in to the whole thing. And then Andrew spoke up. Now, Andrew is an interesting fellow. He brought Peter to Christ in the first place. But Andrew spoke up, and he said, well, there's a kid over here. The Greek word says he's a little kid. The Greek word says he's a lad. It's a word that refers to a very young boy. So here's a little kid over here. Well, he's got 5 barley loaves and a couple of little fish. Barley was this little boy came from a poor family because barley was a grain that was fed to the animals. And only the very poor people would bake with barley. Why? Because it was so cheap and they could afford it. And so this little boy came from a poor family. And then he had a couple of little fish, probably kind of like our sardines. You know, we don't think anything of fresh fish. You know, you get fresh fish at the market. Well, of course, they couldn't have fresh fish. They pickled all of their fish, or they smoked it, and that probably is what he had. He had probably a couple of little, about the size of sardines, you know. And then, well, Andrew says, well, he's got a little bit, but what is that in the face of all of these people? Well, Jesus says, tell them to sit down. I don't know exactly what the conversation was that went on here, but I want to imagine a couple of conversations here. Little boy, can I have your lunch? No, it's mine. You're a big man. You're trying to take away my lunch? It's all I've got. No, I don't think that's what happened. For some reason or another, the little boy said, yeah. And Jesus took that lunch, he offered thanks, and he broke it up and he gave it to all the people. Now, what does that say to us? That says to us that sometime the solution to the biggest problems comes from the most unexpected source. You see, there are people, I've known so many people like this. There's nothing I can do in the church. I'm not a leader. I'm not this. I'm not that. I don't do this and so forth. There's just nothing I can do. If Jesus had said to this little boy, there's 5,000 people out here, son. I want you to take your lunch and feed all 5,000 of them. No, that wouldn't have worked. You know that wouldn't have worked. So what did he do? He gave what little bit he had to someone who could really do something with it. You know, if we could just convince people that no matter how limited your resources are, your personal resources, I'm talking about your time, your abilities, what you can do, and all this sort of thing, just stop and think of, if I give Christ what I can give in my time and my ability, what can Christ do with it? He may do something wonderful with it. You're going to think this is kind of silly, but I'll say it anyway. You know the old story about how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time? Well, no, nobody's going to eat an elephant. I understand that. But the idea of the thing is that big problems are solved by small increments. We don't solve the whole problem of our life at one time. Have you ever seen this thing called Just for Today? Just for today I will do so-and-so. Just for today I will not do so-and-so. Just for today. And the whole thing is wrapped up with the idea that my life can only change one day at a time. Just one day at a time. Now, I can handle a day. I have had some good friends who are alcoholics. I admired these people very much. I've got two good friends who are drug addicts. I admired them very much because they went on the basis, and they're all clean now. They went on the basis that I can handle my addiction one day at a time. I can handle my alcoholism one day at a time. No, I'm not going to say I'll never drink again, I'll never take dope again, but I can say I won't take it today. I can handle that. You see, when we look at the problems, when we look at the work, when we look at the difficulties of life, when we look at life generally and we say, no, I can't solve all of these things. No, but what I can solve today, I'm going to solve. And so this little boy, he didn't say, yes, it's mine, but I'm not going to give it to you. He didn't say, you're a big man, why don't you get your own? He says, here, take mine. Do whatever you can with it. Folks, I'm asking you, do the same thing for the congregation. I have not rehearsed this. The men that I'm going to call on don't know I'm going to call on them. We have a steering committee, and it's made up of Nathan Scott. Stand up, Nathan, please. Paul Hudman, Rudy, and Justin. These men are called the steering committee. They're not elders. What they are doing is simply helping to plan, helping to work, helping to set goals, trying to get things such as the maintenance of the building, all of the things that need to be done for the congregation to operate. These men are trying to help to plan those things. Gentlemen, you can be seated now. Thank you. They can't do all this themselves. No, they don't need somebody to come in and just take the whole load off of them. That might not be too bad, I don't know. But if every single person will add his lunch to the feeding of the 5,000, just think of what God can do with that. Just think of what God could do with you if you said, I want a job in the church. I'll do what I can. That's all that God requires of us. Well, no pressure on this, but I do want you to think about it. In the pew right in front of you, there's some yellow cards. Before you leave today, think about doing this. Take that yellow card, turn it over on the back, and on the back write your name and write your phone number. And write this sentence down. Please give me a job to do. I'll be waiting for your phone call. You know, when I was a kid, we used to say, I dare you. And if you really want to put it up, what'd you say? I double dog dare you. Well, I'm saying to every one of us, every single one of us, I dare you today. Expose yourself to this open door of opportunity. You might say, I don't have any idea what I can do. That's not the point. You can do something. This little boy, he didn't have any idea what Christ could do with his lunch. But Christ did something wonderful, didn't he? Folks, the church, you and I, we are the church. We need each other. We need to work together with each other. We need to plan together with each other. We've got these men that are asking. They're asking for the cooperation and a little bit of time and a little bit of effort from every single person here. So before you leave, won't you do that? There's another conversation that I want us to think about today. I think about this little boy. I have an idea his mom and dad were at home and he came by himself. Maybe that's not correct. What do you think went on when he went home? He went home and you know, well, son, did you enjoy that teacher? Yes, I did. I really enjoyed that teacher. Mom, you won't believe what happened. Oh, what happened? That man took my lunch and he fed all 5,000 people with my lunch. Son, we've taught you not to lie. Now, don't go around telling stories like that. No, Mom, it's true. He did that with my little lunch. You see, when you and I, as a congregation of God's people, begin absorbing the idea of this little boy, that Christ can do something with me that I never thought I could do. When we learn that lesson, the church will have a transformation into a church that is working, that is functional, that's doing things for itself, for other people, reaching out to the community. But it all depends on us. The feeding of the 5,000 contains a lot of phenomenal things. The most phenomenal is that Jesus did it. But standing right behind it is a little boy. The little boy who was willing to do whatever he could to share his lunch. If you're not a Christian today, you want to become a child of God, we're going to sing a song of invitation that suggests the Master's call. Will you come together while we stand and sing, please?